On a whiteout Christmas night, I came home without warning and froze when I saw my daughter huddled on the porch, her thin blouse soaked through, lips bruised purple, empty eyes staring into the snow. Just beyond the glass, her in-laws raised their glasses, laughing around the fireplace, jingle bells blaring like mockery. I rushed in, scooped her into my arms, held her tight with shaking hands, and said only 6 words enough to silence the entire house. My name is Linda Parker, 67 years old, an American woman who has spent most of her life in martial arts, coaching taekwondo, and being a mother. I used to believe the hardest pain was the fall on the mat. It wasn't. The cold on that porch and what I saw tonight crushed my heart more than any kick I ever took. I came back to Boise, Idaho after months away, after trip to Seattle and national tournaments. I thought I'd planned the perfect surprise. Show up at my daughter's door on Christmas Eve, hug her, sit by the lit tree, share a simple mother-daughter meal. I pictured Hannah's smile, the one that used to melt away my longest days. Instead, I found her like a withered leaf in a winter wind, discarded like she had no worth. The Whitman house glowed bright. Through the window I saw a holiday table loaded with staples. A golden roasted turkey, a bowl of cranberry salad sparkling under the lights, red wine gleaming in crystal glasses. I heard Evelyn, Hannah's mother-in-law, laughing loudly and saw Ryan, my son-in-law, in a white shirt, raising his glass with swagger. The fireplace crackled, jingle bells rang out. The house radiated holiday warmth. But outside, on that very porch, my daughter shook uncontrollably, curled in on herself like a small bird battered by a blizzard. I strode across the snow, my boots sinking deep, my heart pounding. "Hannah!" I called softly, but the wind hissing through the eaves seemed to swallow my voice. I knelt, draped my still sweaty coaching jacket from the long trip over her shoulders. She lifted her head, eyes red, blue lips forming one word, "Mom." Then she collapsed against me, her body so cold I feared her breathing might stop at any moment. I held her tight as a surge of anger rose, impossible to contain. My daughter, my own flesh and blood, raised on simple dreams of a warm home, was being treated like disposable trash. Inside, they clinked glasses, pretending her suffering didn't exist. That contrast slapped me hard, setting every cell in me on fire. I stood and lifted Hannah. She felt frail, weightless, like a gust could carry her away. I headed straight for the front door, my boots thudding on the porch planks. With every step my blood boiled, my eyes locked on the bright doorway. I didn't care how powerful they were or what they thought of me. I knew one thing: I would not let them abandon my daughter one more time. When the door swung open, I saw Evelyn with a half-finished glass of wine, lips painted a sharp red. Her eyes froze when she saw Hannah in my arms. The music still played, the chatter carried on from the table, but the air between us turned heavy. I swallowed my rage and stared into Evelyn's eyes, then looked down at Ryan stepping in behind his mother. 100 things I wanted to say pounded in my head, 1,000 words I wanted to scream, but they condensed into exactly 6. 6 I never thought I'd say on Christmas Eve. 6 that made the Whitman house go silent, jingle bells caught in their throats. No one in that living room expected me, the woman they'd always treated as an outsider, to call the truth by its name. Faces flushed with wine went rigid. Evelyn forced a syrupy smile, Ryan scowled, and others looked away to dodge my eyes. But I wasn't the soft Linda standing on the sidelines anymore. I felt my arms clamp around Hannah, her chest still trembling with thin breaths. I knew then and there the fight of my life had begun. I carried Hannah out of that bright house, each heavy step sinking into the snow. Behind us, glasses clinked, and the Whitmans' laughter swelled again, as if I'd never made their room freeze. No one followed. No explanations. No hands reached out to stop us. They let me carry my daughter away as if she were a broken object. Outside, the wind howled. so cold it felt like my own breath had turned to ice. Still, I felt Hannah's faint breaths against my neck. Her body was weightless, shivering like a winter leaf about to fall. I pulled her closer, shielding her with everything I had. Inside me, a slow fire caught hot enough to melt every sheet of ice covering Boise that Christmas Eve. A cab waited at the end of the empty street. I opened the door, settled Hannah in the back seat, wrapped another coat around her, and told the driver to take us straight to my small apartment. The whole ride I was silent, eyes fixed on her face. Her hair was a tangled mess, plastered to her clammy temples. Her eyes were shut, lashes wet. I stroked her hand, the same soft hand that used to grip mine when she learned to walk. Now it was cold, shaking, too weak to squeeze back. The driver kept sneaking looks in the rearview mirror. He must have felt the same numb outrage I did. But he stayed quiet and pressed the gas, cutting through the whiteout. Strangers fear touching another's grief. Me, I had no right to fear anymore. Questions looped through my head. How long had she endured this? How many times had they shoved her into the cold while I had no idea? I felt like a failure. My heart felt cracked. All those years I chased tournaments, coached teams, counted medals. I told myself I was setting an example for my daughter, but who wiped her tears in the dark? The cab pulled up to the old apartment building where I've lived alone for years. I helped Hannah inside and onto the small bed. I took off her shoes, unwound my scarf, tucked thick blankets around her. In the kitchen, I boiled water, made hot cocoa, and sat by her bed waiting for her to wake. The sweet smell filled the room, but Hannah didn't open her eyes. She stirred, lips trembling, whispering something I couldn't catch. I leaned close and heard a few broken words. "I'm sorry, Mom." My chest seized. My daughter cast out, broken in body and spirit, still thought she'd failed me. I held her hand to my cheek, tears burning. "No, Hannah, you are not at fault. You never were." I said it barely above a whisper, but every word felt etched into the air. When she slipped back into a fitful sleep, I stayed there, watching. Memories poured in. As a child, she tore around the Christmas tree, shoes dusted in cookie flour, mouth smeared with candy. She lit up our home on winter nights. She grew up kind, dreaming of a simple, warm household. I once believed Ryan would give her that. Now I knew that faith had been a bitter mistake. I sat up all night, the streetlights smearing across the frosted window. Anger kept rising, but I wouldn't let it explode. I buried it deep and turned it into a quiet flame. If I let it flare once, it would burn out fast. I needed to tend it, feed it until I could use it to burn down the wall the Whitmans had built. Near dawn, Hannah stirred, eyes half open, confused. "Mom, you won't leave me, will you?" she asked, voice so small it sounded afraid of itself. I bent over and held her. "No, sweetheart, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere, and I won't let anyone hurt you again." Her breath shivered against my ear, like she didn't dare believe it. But I knew this was a promise I'd keep with everything I had left. When she fell asleep again, I went to the kitchen and pulled a stack of papers from an old drawer. Bank statements, years of money I'd sent to help the two of them. I organized every page, careful as if I were prepping for a championship match. I remembered the calls when her voice shook, asking for money to fix the roof or buy household necessities. I never asked questions, I just sent it. Now those meaningless papers would be evidence. Proof I had always been there, and that Hannah was never a freeloader, no matter what the Whitmans claimed. My hands trembled, but my eyes were sharp. I couldn't punch my way through this injustice like I did when I was young. This fight wasn't on a wooden floor. It was in law, in public opinion, and in spirit. I would need to be shrewd, steady. I would carry this anger in my chest, not let it carry me, and turn it into a shield for my daughter. When daylight edged through the window, Hannah slept on, face pale but a little calmer. I poured a fresh cup of cocoa, set it on the bedside table so warmth would greet her when she woke. Then I sat and closed my eyes for a moment. Never in my life had the path ahead looked so clear. I knew this Christmas wouldn't be the cozy holiday others enjoyed. For us, it was the start of a war, one I could not afford to lose. The next morning, Boise woke under a gray mist and a thick blanket of snow. I put on a long coat and wool scarf and slipped out while Hannah still slept, her face pale but more peaceful. I needed groceries and to quiet my mind. The street was quiet, only the scrape of snowplows cutting a steady rhythm. I tucked my chin into my collar and walked, when a short chirp from a police cruiser sounded down the block. A patrol car stopped at the intersection, the window rolled down, and a uniformed officer stepped out. Short brown hair, tall and solid, a decisive stride. I froze for a heartbeat and blurted, "Mark?" He turned, eyes bright beneath his cap, startled and then smiling. "Miss Parker. My God, how long has it been?" I smiled too, though it was tight with emotion. Gone was the 15-year-old kid from the Taekwondo gym, drenched in sweat with fire in his eyes. Mark Johnson was now a city cop with a radio on his shoulder and a duty belt full of gear. We stopped at the corner, snow drifting around us. Mark pulled off a glove and shook my hand, still that firm grip, I remembered. "When did you get back to Boise?" he asked, eyes warm but worried. I sighed, staring down the street. "Last night, and I wish I'd come sooner." I hadn't planned to hide anything. Maybe it was his eyes still honest, like years hadn't changed that made me let it out. I told him briefly about the scene at the Whitman house, Hannah shivering in the snow while the family partied inside. My voice rasped, my hands still felt as cold as when I carried her. Mark listened in silence, face tightening. His eyes darkened, his fist clenched at his side. When I finished, he spoke slowly. "I believe you. I've heard things about the Whitmans, but I didn't think they were this cruel." I looked at him, hurt and hope mixing in me. "What do you mean, heard things?" He glanced around and lowered his voice. "They're wealthy and connected. Ryan's father, Harold, used to be a judge. I once saw a traffic case clear evidence the Whitman boy was at fault, but the file vanished overnight. The victim had to stay quiet. Everyone in the system knows they're trouble if you cross them." A chill ran down my spine, not from the wind, but from the blunt truth. "So, if I take this to court, they'll try to shut it down?" I asked. Mark nodded, eyes steady. "They might. But Miss Parker, you're not alone. I've seen them throw their weight around too many times. If you push this, I'll testify." It was like a light flipped on in the dark. I stared at him, my former student, bowing before a match, now standing with a courage I hadn't seen in anyone else. I choked up. "Mark, my daughter is exhausted. She doesn't believe in justice anymore. But I can't stand by and watch them destroy her. If you help us, I'll owe you for life." He smiled faintly, resolve bright in his eyes. "I owe you more than you think. You taught me discipline and grit. Now it's my turn to stand with you." We stood quiet for a few seconds, church bells carrying from somewhere down the street. My hands shook, not from the cold, but because, for the first time in years, I felt I had an ally. "But you need to be ready," Mark said, voice dropping. "They won't sit still. The closer you get to the truth, the harder they'll hit back." I drew a long breath and met his gaze. I walked into that house and saw them leaving my daughter to freeze on the porch. "Nothing will make me back down now." Mark nodded, then pulled a card from his pocket, his direct number printed on it. "Call me any time you need. Day or night, I'll be there." I took the card and clenched it in my palm, feeling like I was holding a new weapon. As we said goodbye, he stepped into the patrol car, but before closing the door, he looked at me, eyes firm. "Miss Parker, they think they're untouchable. But I believe this time they picked the wrong person." The car rolled away, leaving me standing on the snow-covered street, heart racing. Mark's words echoed in my head. I knew the road ahead was full of storms, but now I wasn't alone. I went back to the apartment, opened the door softly so I wouldn't wake Hannah. She was still there, breathing more evenly, her face less tense. I sat by the bed, took my daughter's hand, and whispered a promise. "You're not alone anymore, Hannah. I have an ally. And I'm getting you out of this darkness." Hannah's fingers curled slightly, as if she could feel my promise. I smiled through tears, knowing the quiet fire in me now had more fuel to burn brighter. That evening, while I was sorting old bank papers at the kitchen table, the wind hissing through the hallway door made me jump. Boise was still locked in winter, snow falling nonstop, icy patches clinging to the windows. Hannah was asleep, breathing steady, still weak, but no longer shaking like yesterday. I sat under the dim yellow light, marker in hand, highlighting each transfer, each bill. Just then, a soft noise at the door seam. I shivered, stood up, and walked over. In the hallway light, a thick envelope lay quietly on the threshold, like someone had shoved it in and fled. I opened the door and looked around. The corridor stretched on, empty, only the wind howling by the far window. Not a soul. I picked up the envelope, heart pounding. The paper was slightly damp, the bottom corner wet from melted snow. I brought it inside, sat down, and tore it open. Inside was a folded note, messy handwriting, smudged ink, but the line was clear. "Stay out of the Whitman family's business. If not, you'll end up exactly like your daughter." I went still. My hand crushed the paper without thinking. The veins at my temples throbbed. For a moment I heard my heartbeat slam against my ribs, hard and fast like a war drum. I took a deep breath and steadied myself. I wouldn't let fear take the wheel. This wasn't my first threat, but it was the first aimed at my daughter with such spite. I glanced at the bedroom where Hannah slept, her small shoulders rising and falling under the blanket, thinking of all the humiliation she'd endured, and now this shadow over her lit my anger like a fuse. I crumpled the note and pitched it into the trash. The dry thud broke the kitchen silence. I wasn't scared, I was clear-headed. The threat only made me more determined. If I faltered or stayed quiet, Hannah would keep being their victim. I went back to the table, carefully gathering every document, placing them in a clear plastic folder. Bank statements with my name and Hannah's, the monthly transfers I sent. My handwritten notes, "Buy extra groceries, make sure you eat," or "Fix the roof before winter." Now they would be evidence. Proof that I was present, that I helped, and that Ryan and his family twisted everything into a burden and pinned it on Hannah. Staring at the thick folder, memories rushed in. I remembered Hannah sobbing on the phone, saying Ryan told her, "Don't waste money." I remembered sending money for a new space heater, and then she confessed Ryan took it to give his mother a gift. The more I thought, the sharper the pain, but the harder my resolve. I knew I couldn't fight alone. I picked up my phone, hesitated, then dialed James, the older attorney I'd known years ago from my Taekwondo Federation days. His rough, familiar voice came on the line. "Linda? It's been a while. What's going on?" I kept it brief, holding back my anger, though every word shook. James was quiet for a long moment, then said flatly, "I understand, but you need to know this opponent isn't simple. The Whitmans have money and connections. They'll hit back hard. I'm ready for that, James. I'm not afraid for myself. I'm afraid Hannah will collapse before justice finds her." On the other end, I heard a heavy sigh. Then he said, "I'll review the file, but you'll need more witnesses. You alone won't be enough." I immediately thought of Mark. He'd promised to stand with me. The thought calmed me. Maybe this time, I wasn't completely alone. After the call, I went to the living room and opened the window to let the cold air rush in. The chill cleared my head. I stood there, looking at the lights in other apartments, listening to the distant laughter of children. Part of me ached, thinking how Hannah once dreamed of something this simple, a home filled with a child's laughter. 4 losses and a cruel in-law family had stolen that dream. I closed my eyes and took a long breath. Tonight, in this small apartment, I chose my path. No matter how many envelopes come, I won't back down. I returned to the table, pulled out an old notebook, turned to the first page, and wrote, December 26th. The fight begins. I listed what needed to be done. 1. Gather all financial records. 2. Collect Hannah's medical files. 3. Record Hannah's statement when she is strong enough. 4. Contact Mark to confirm he'll testify. 5. Prepare for media if the case goes public. Each line appeared neat and clear, like a battle plan. I felt like the coach I used to be, the one who taught kids to never quit on the mat. The arena had changed, but the rules hadn't. Night thinned out. In the kitchen, only the wall clock ticked. I put the papers away, turned off the light, and went back to the bedroom. Hannah was still asleep, one hand outside the blanket, pale and thin. I held it gently and whispered, "Sleep, sweetheart. I'm ready." Outside, snow kept falling, blanketing the city in cold white. Inside me, a fire rose stronger than ever. The next morning, Hannah woke to weak sunlight slipping through the blinds. I was already on the edge of the bed, holding her hand. She opened her eyes, glanced at me, then turned to the wall like she was afraid to meet her own mother's gaze. I stroked her back and softened my voice. "You don't have to hide from me anymore. I know." Hannah trembled, then burst into tears. All those stored-up tears soaked the pillow. She spoke in broken pieces, voice ragged. "Mom, I lost 4 babies. Every time the bleeding started, I just clutched my stomach and screamed in the bathroom. Ryan stood outside, but he never came in. And his mother, she just shook her head and said I was an embarrassment to their family. I pulled her into my arms, feeling my heart rip into pieces. "Why didn't you call me? Why did you go through this alone?" Hannah gave a twisted, tearful smile. "I did call, but you were always traveling for training, and I didn't want to bother you. I thought, maybe I was just weak, not like other women." I shook my head, tears spilling. "No, Hannah, you were never weak." "They were cruel," she went on, voice dropping to a whisper like wind through a crack. "After the 3rd miscarriage, I started feeling worthless. Ryan stopped looking at me, stopped touching me. He got cold, coming home late, leaving early. I cooked, and no one ate. Evelyn kept needling me. A woman who can't have children is like a dead tree. It hurt so much, Mom. I didn't know who to tell. Every word cut deep. I remembered late-night calls, her muffled sobs, and me telling myself it would pass. I'd lied to myself so I could sleep. I held her tighter and whispered in her ear, "I'm sorry I didn't come sooner, but from now on, you won't be alone." Hannah pressed her face into my shoulder, shaking. I could smell the cheap shampoo in her hair, the scent of sadness. I wanted to take it all away, carry it for her. Some wounds only time and love can heal. When she finally calmed, I sat alone in the living room, looking at the photos on the wall. Little Hannah, golden hair, bright smile, clear blue eyes. She once raced around the taekwondo gym, cheering me on. When she was 6, she ran into my arms and shouted, "You're my superhero, Mom!" And now that superhero was a 67-year-old woman, sitting helpless before her daughter's pain. Tears streamed down my face. But in that flood of memories, I saw something new. Every time Hannah fell, she gave me strength. Each tear was a push. I could not fail. That night, after she fell asleep, I went through the stack again. Every receipt was proof of love trampled on. I remembered sending $5,000 to fix the roof money that vanished. I remembered sending $1,000 for vitamins after a miscarriage, only to learn Ryan used it to throw his sister a birthday party. I added notes to my notebook. All support funds diverted. Need bank confirmations. I closed it and looked out the window. The night was still dark, the wind still howling, but for the first time I saw clearly. Hannah's painful memories would become my weapon. I knew some would doubt us. A court might toss evidence, a lawyer might twist facts, but no one could deny my daughter's tears, and if the law turned its back, I'd turn to the public to hearts that still felt. In that moment, I saw myself back on the mat, legs planted, eyes focused, breathing hard but steady. The difference now was simple. There was no fair referee, and the opponent didn't play by the rules. I went back to the bedroom and pulled the blanket over Hannah. She slept, cheeks still damp, eyelashes flickering. I promised myself these memories of tears would be more than sorrow. They would be why I fight to the end. The court date came faster than I expected. Boise was locked in early January, cold, wind whistling past the high windows of the county courthouse. I gripped Hannah's hand as we walked into the lobby. Her hand was ice cold and shaking, like she'd fall if I let go. I whispered, "You're not alone. I'm here." She nodded faintly, eyes sunken from too many sleepless nights. In that look I saw more than exhaustion. I saw quiet despair. She once shone. Now she was a shadow, trailing me in fear. Across the aisle, the Whitmans were already there. Ryan in a gray suit and tight tie, confidence oozing. He sat beside his father, Harold, calm face, cold gaze of a man used to power. Evelyn, deep red lipstick, sat straight with gloved hands glittering with rings. Abigail, Ryan's sister, leaned in to whisper, a mocking smile curling as they glanced our way. I guided Hannah to the plaintiff's row. James stood beside us, rearranging a thick file, eyes steady but shoulders taut. He leaned in and murmured, "Don't worry, I'll lay it all out. What matters is that Hannah stays calm." I nodded and squeezed my daughter's hand. She inhaled slowly and lowered her head to avoid their stares. Court began. The judge, a middle-aged man with neatly combed graying hair and a stern face, entered. He read through the formalities, voice flat and cool. James rose and started. He presented the evidence, bank statements for the money I'd sent to support Hannah, medical files for 4 miscarriages, and the doctor's depression diagnosis. He finished. Firm. This is a severe case of emotional abuse. The defendant and his family repeatedly humiliated, isolated, and neglected the plaintiff while she was in poor health, causing serious mental collapse. I looked over at Hannah. Her eyes were red, but I knew every word James said was the truth she'd lived day after day. Then it was their turn. A young attorney in a black suit with slicked hair stood up. His voice cut sharp. The plaintiff, Miss Hannah Parker, was not abused. The symptoms presented are exaggerations by someone looking to dodge responsibility. The Whitman family provided housing, care, and financial support. She contributed nothing to the household and failed in her duties as a wife. Each word dropped like a hammer. I saw Hannah's hand clench her skirt, her body curling in. I grit my teeth, holding myself back from jumping up right then. They brought a witness, Martha, the family's former housekeeper. She stepped to the stand, eyes avoiding ours. Miss Hannah often locked herself in her room all day. I did most of the cooking and cleaning. She always complained she was sick, but I never saw what illness. I shot to my feet, my voice tight with anger. "You're lying!" Hannah cooked every single meal and baked the very pies your family sat there enjoying. The judge slammed the gavel, voice firm. "Miss Parker, maintain order. If not, I'll have to ask you to leave." I drew a deep breath, shaking with fury, but I sat down. I glanced at Harold and caught the corner of his mouth lifting in a cold smile. Clearly this had been arranged. James stayed calm and moved to the audio evidence. It was the recording Mark secretly made on Christmas Eve. Evelyn's mocking, useless dead tree, Ryan's bitter voice, calling Hannah a faller prodemented faker. When the sound filled the courtroom, the room went dead silent. I saw Hannah trembling as tears streamed down her cheeks, but the other side jumped up immediately. Objection. This recording was made without consent, violating privacy. It's illegal and inadmissible. The judge frowned and struck the gavel. Objection sustained. The recording is excluded from the record. My heart dropped like a stone. I looked at James, his hand tightened on his briefcase, jaw set. The room buzzed with whispers. I glanced at the Whitman row and met Ryan's triumphant stare. He leaned back, arms crossed, with a half smile. Evelyn turned to whisper to Abigail, both of them smirking as if they'd just been freed. I felt heat rush to my face. All that evidence, all that truth, tossed aside with one dry excuse. Inadmissible. I wanted to scream, to rip off that mask of fake justice. Then I looked at Hannah. She sat still, shoulders shaking. If I lost control, she'd crumble too. I bit down hard and forced it all inside. The hearing dragged on. Their arguments and cooked-up reports twisted Hannah from victim into a freeloader. Every sentence was salt ground into a wound, but I understood this was only round one of a long fight. When day one ended, I led Hannah out. The late afternoon sky was gray, snow drifting steadily. She walked beside me, heavy steps, eyes cast down like she'd lost faith. I squeezed her shoulder and leaned in to whisper, "Don't be afraid, Hannah. Even if the court turns its back, even if they twist the truth, I won't let you fall." She looked up, eyes full of tears, like a lost child needing something to hold. For a moment I felt like her superhero again, and I swore, no matter how many cracks there are in this system, I'd find a way to drag the truth into the light. The days that followed felt like a nightmare on repeat. Every morning I walked into that courthouse, it felt like stepping into a cold arena where truth was bent and lies were fed. Hannah sat beside me, eyes hollowed, hands freezing. I held her hand tight, trying to pass her whatever warmth I had left. Judgment Day came. The courtroom was packed, the air so heavy it was hard to breathe. Ryan sat upright, smug like victory was certain. Evelyn adjusted her hair and shot me a disdainful glance. Abigail chuckled softly, whispering to her two kids behind her. Harold, the man who'd sat on the bench for decades, leaned back, cool eyes sliding over us like he was watching a show. The judge entered with a file in hand. I watched every move. He read the ruling in a flat, steady voice. The court grants the divorce of the plaintiff, Hannah Parker, from the defendant, Ryan Whitman. A small light flickered in my chest. At least my daughter was free of that nightmare marriage. I squeezed Hannah's hand and nodded, telling her to stay strong. But the next words fell like ice hammers. However, the court does not recognize the allegations of emotional abuse due to insufficient admissible evidence. Regarding asset division, given the defendant's greater financial contribution during the marriage, the majority of marital property shall be awarded to Ryan Whitman. The room went silent. I sat frozen. Not recognized and awarded to Ryan drilled into my ears, drowning out all our effort. Hannah folded into the chair, hands shaking over her face, her quiet sob ripping me apart. I couldn't hold back. I jumped up, voice breaking. "This isn't justice. Leaving my daughter outside in the snow is no evidence? Those blatant insults are not admissible?" The judge slammed the gavel, barking, "Miss Parker, be silent or I will have you removed." I stared him down, tears streaming, and forced myself to sit. My heart hammered. My chest tightened. I glanced across the aisle. Ryan leaned back with a winning grin. Evelyn took a leisurely sip of water. Abigail smirked, eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Harold gave a small nod, like everything had gone exactly to plan. In that moment, I saw naked injustice. not because evidence was lacking, but because the scales had been tipped. When the judge ended the session, people shuffled out. I stayed put, holding Hannah as she shook. Murmurs rippled around us. A few sympathetic looks, but no one came over. Ryan strolled past. He paused, leaned close to my ear, and whispered, "Told you you can't win. Now go back to your little apartment." His breath reeked of wine and made me sick. I wanted to deck him like I once could on the mat, but I knew that would only give him more to use against me. I held his gaze and dropped my voice to steel. "This fight isn't over, Ryan. You will pay for this." He shrugged and smirked, strutting off. Evelyn and Abigail followed, a cloud of heavy perfume and a snicker that cut like a blade. Hannah looked up, tears smeared across her face. She choked. "Mom, I can't do this anymore." I lost. I pulled her in, patting her back, whispering, "No, you haven't. This is a bad verdict, not the end." Her eyes were filled with despair, but for a second I saw a tiny glint, that fragile thread of hope I had to guard. Outside, Boise was grim, snow falling harder. I wrapped my scarf tighter around Hannah's neck and helped her down the steps. Through the crowd, I spotted Mark in uniform, watching us. He gave a small nod, face tense but resolute. He'd seen it all. We headed to the lot, shuffling through the knife-cold wind. Hannah leaned into me, legs like stone. I wrapped an arm around her and made a silent vow. Today's ruling might be a loss, but it's the spark that will make me rise stronger. The Whitmans think they've won, but they don't know this. Hannah Parker's mother will never quit. In the days after, our little apartment felt swallowed by darkness. Hannah sat by the window for hours, watching snow fall and melt, eyes empty like tomorrow had nothing to offer. I cooked breakfast and dinner. Sometimes she'd tap the spoon to the food and set it down. I knew that verdict had crushed the last of her faith. I hurt too, but my pain hardened into a steady anger. I stopped sleeping, sat at the kitchen table night after night, flipping through files, bills, handwritten notes. I replayed Ryan's sneer, Evelyn's contempt, Harold's satisfied smile. They thought they'd won. But once the truth hits people's hearts, no power can smother it. It started with one photo. On Judgment Day, as Ryan walked out smirking, a local reporter snapped a shot. Behind him, I was hugging Hannah while she cried. He held his head high like a victor. The paper ran it the next morning with a short, heavy headline. "The Whitmans, Who Owns Justice?" Within 24 hours, the photo was everywhere. People didn't need legal details. They saw the contrast. A weeping, broken woman and a swaggering man. Comments poured in. "If this is justice, I don't trust the system." And, "An elderly mother protecting her daughter while the abuser smiles? Disgraceful." I read every line quietly, warmth rising in my chest. Not gloating, just the feeling of 1,000 unseen hands on my shoulders whispering, "You're not alone." Local TV moved fast. A young reporter came to my apartment, sat across from me in the small kitchen, eyes bright. "Miss Parker, are you willing to share your story?" I hesitated, thinking of the threat envelope. Then I thought of Hannah and her tears. If I stayed quiet, I'd be accepting the Whitmans' cruelty as normal. I nodded. The interview aired that night. I told the Christmas Eve story, finding my daughter in the snow while her in-laws toasted by the fire. I talked about her 4 losses and the cold insults. No embellishment, the truth hurt enough to move people. At the end, I looked straight into the camera, voice shaky but firm. "If justice in the courtroom won't stand with us, I believe justice in the world will. I believe in the hearts of mothers, fathers, and anyone who's known the pain of loss." Within hours, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages came from everywhere: sympathy, encouragement, promises to share our story so others wouldn't face the same fate. I looked at Hannah. She sat quietly, eyes still puffy, but there was a tiny spark in her gaze. Mark called too, voice steady. "Miss Parker, what you did took courage. Public pressure will make them think twice. I'll stay close any time they try something shady." I thanked him, eyes blurring. I'd told my students for years, real strength is the faith behind the punch. Today I finally understood it myself. The next day, statewide outlets picked it up. Some national networks mentioned the Whitman case. Harold, once a symbol of integrity on the bench, was suddenly under a cloud of questions about abusing power. Ryan was dubbed the cold-blooded husband. Evelyn and Abigail became examples of cruelty in angry op-eds. I knew public mood could swing. But for once, we had a voice. That evening, Hannah sat beside me, fingers pinching the hem of her shirt. "Mom, do people really believe us?" I smiled and smoothed her hair. "Yes, see? Justice in a courtroom can be bought, but the justice in people's hearts can't." She dropped her head on my shoulder and cried for the first time in days without that heavy, hopeless look. These tears weren't bitter anymore. They felt like rain washing things clean, opening a way out. I looked out the window. Snow still fell outside, but I could feel spring slowly coming. I knew the fight was still long, but this time it wasn't just the two of us. We had a whole community watching, speaking up, and that was a power the Whitmans never saw coming. In the days after the story spread, our little apartment became a refuge for the two of us. Snow kept falling outside, but inside I felt the air change. Hannah didn't sit for hours at the window anymore. She started reading the articles, going through every supportive comment. Sometimes I saw her lips move, like she wanted to believe the world really was on her side. One afternoon, while I was making chicken soup in the kitchen, there was a knock. I wiped my hands and opened the door. Mark stood there in plain clothes with a big paper bag. He gave a small smile, warm but serious. "I figured you two could use a few things. I brought some fruit and a couple of cookbooks." I was touched and invited him in. Hannah was on the couch and looked surprised to see him. She ducked her head and said softly, "Hi." Mark sat across from her and set the bag on the table. He pulled items out one by one, explaining simply, "These apples have lots of vitamins, good for you." "And the cookbooks?" I remember Hannah said she likes to cook. His tone was calm, never pushy, but I saw Hannah blush a little. I slipped back into the kitchen and pretended to keep busy, giving them space. After a while, I heard quiet conversation. Hannah picked up a book, flipped a few pages, blinking. She said, I used to want to try making apple pie with cinnamon, but no one ate it, so I gave up." Mark smiled gently. "That's okay. If you make it, I'll be your first taste tester." My throat tightened. It had been so long since I'd seen a spark in Hannah's eyes, shy but hopeful. That night after Mark left, Hannah sat for a long time and then whispered, "Mom, why is he still kind to me? I have nothing left." I put a hand on her shoulder and looked into her tear-bright eyes. "You're still you, Hannah. Your worth isn't what you've lost. It's that you still have a loving heart. Good people see that." Her eyes welled up and she hugged me like a child who'd found solid ground. In the days that followed, Mark stopped by more often. Sometimes he brought warm donuts from the corner shop. Sometimes he just came for tea and to check in. He never pushed. He sat and listened, sharing small stories from patrol. "Snow was thick today. I helped an older lady who slipped." Or, "A little boy got lost in the supermarket. Crying for his mom, I carried him aisle to aisle." Those simple stories warmed our apartment, pushing out the heaviness. One evening, Hannah suddenly stood up from the couch, went into the kitchen, and pulled out a bag of flour. Her voice was small but steady. "Mom, I want to try making that apple cinnamon pie again." I turned and saw her hands shaking, but her eyes were determined. I smiled. "All right, I'll be your helper." We got to work. Flour dusted the counter. Cinnamon drifted in the air. Hannah fumbled a few times and spilled sugar, but she kept going, focused like she wanted to forget everything else. When the pie came out, the whole place filled with a sweet, cozy smell. Hannah set the hot pan on the table, eyes shining at what she'd made. Right then, a knock at the door. It was Mark. I smiled and let him in. Hannah flushed and slid the pie toward him. "Could you try it?" Mark took a bite and nodded. "It's really good, thank you." Hannah's shy smile nearly made me cry. I hadn't seen a smile like that in a long time, one not buried under tears and pain. That night, after Mark left, Hannah sat by the window and traced a finger across the fogged glass. She spoke softly, almost to herself. "Maybe. I still have a chance to start over." I wrapped an arm around her shoulders and whispered, "Not maybe, Hannah. You will. There are always hands reaching out from the dark. You just have to take one." She leaned into me without another word. But in her eyes I saw a glimmer I thought was gone for good. Faith in life. And I understood our fight wasn't over, but at least my daughter wasn't alone in the dark anymore. She had a hand to hold and a flame to light the path. In the weeks after, the public didn't quiet down. On social media, the Whitman name was everywhere, buried in heavy criticism. Photos of Ryan smirking in court were shared non-stop, turning into a symbol of cold indifference. Reporters dug deeper, pulling up the backroom ties Harold had used to shield the family. It all rushed in like a flood, ripping away the glossy mask they'd worn for years. I knew it was time to face them head-on. I couldn't just sit back and let the community speak for us. I needed to point to the truth myself. I asked James and Mark to meet at my place. We spread out the files, the paperwork, even the threat letter. James thought for a long time and finally said, "This is the right moment. Public pressure is strong. If we file an appeal with this evidence, they won't be able to squeeze us the way they did before," Mark added, voice firm. "I'll testify too. I was there on Christmas Eve." I heard and saw what they said. I won't let them deny it. I looked at those two men and felt a surge of emotion and resolve. This time, I wasn't walking in alone. On appeal day, Hannah and I entered the courthouse with a different spirit. She was still weak, but she held her head up, hair tied back, eyes not hiding anymore. I squeezed her hand and whispered, "Remember, you're not just a victim. You're a living witness, and you have the right to speak." In the courtroom, the Whitmans didn't look so sure of themselves. Ryan was pale, trying to look calm but glancing around. Evelyn wore a sleek coat, but her hand on her purse trembled. Abigail stared down, afraid to look up. Only Harold kept that proud air, but I saw sweat beading on his forehead. James opened strong with financial and medical records and the threat letter. Then Mark took the stand. He laid out the whole night, from me lifting Hannah off the frozen porch to the insults echoing from the dining room. He spoke slowly and clearly, eyes straight ahead. The room went still. Each word seemed to carve itself into the silence. When it was Ryan's turn, he tried to deny it, snapping, "It's all a misunderstanding. Hannah always plays the victim to milk sympathy." This time, no one bought it. People in the gallery muttered. Some shook their heads. Camera flashes popped, catching his strained face. Evelyn tried to defend herself, but the more she spoke, the more her malice showed. Finally, the new judge, a short-haired woman with sharp eyes, spoke. Her voice was crisp, every word landing clean. "The court recognizes the plaintiff, Hannah Parker, as a victim of prolonged emotional abuse. The Whitman family used power and contempt to humiliate, isolate, and cause severe psychological harm." I held my breath and squeezed Hannah's hand. She broke down, but these were tears of release, not despair. "As for asset division," the judge continued, "the court rejects the defendant's arguments. A portion of the marital property is awarded to the plaintiff to ensure an independent, stable life. The claim for emotional damages will proceed in the next phase." Applause broke out in the gallery. Harold's face went ashen, his lips pressed tight. Ryan collapsed into his chair, hands clenched. Evelyn covered her face. Abigail stared at the floor. I turned and hugged Hannah. She sobbed into my shoulder, whispering between breaths, "Mom." They acknowledged me. "I'm not faking anymore." I held her, tears falling into her hair, joy and ache flooding together. After everything, that simple acknowledgement was our biggest win. We stepped out into winter sunlight that felt strangely bright. Reporters swarmed with cameras and mics. One asked, "Miss Parker, what would you say to people going through what your daughter did?" I lifted my head and spoke slowly. "Don't stay silent. Silence only feeds the abusers. Speak up. Go to your community. Justice can be slow, but when enough people see the truth, it won't stay buried." Applause rose again. Hannah stood beside me, wiping tears, and this time she smiled. It was small, but real. I knew this fight had cost us plenty, but the Whitmans finally paid a price. And I, a mother who thought she had nothing left, found new strength in love, in persistence, and in the kindness of strangers. After the ruling, our little apartment seemed brighter, even with Boise still under snow. Hannah no longer froze at every knock. She woke earlier, walked to the kitchen, poured herself a hot cup of tea. She still looked fragile, but the light in her eyes had returned something I thought I'd never see again. One morning, she sat at the table, spinning a silver spoon, hesitated, and looked at me. "Mom, I want to try working again. Nothing big, just something small." I paused, then smiled. "If you feel ready, I'm with you. What matters most is getting your trust back." Her eyes flickered with resolve. I knew those simple words were a big step. The next day, Mark stopped by with a small plant and set it in the middle of the kitchen table. "It's a poinsettia, a Christmas flower, but I think it's perfect for starting a new season." Hannah smiled softly and touched the bright red leaves. I watched and felt a quiet gratitude. In our darkest days, Mark showed up not loud or flashy, just offering a steady hand. That steady hand pulled my daughter back from the edge. I changed, too. From someone who only clutched files and bills, I learned to breathe slower, to make myself a cup of tea in the morning instead of rushing to the gym. I understood that to protect Hannah, I needed not just fighting strength, but gentleness as well. One afternoon, we went together to Boise's Central Square. It was late winter, but the sunlight stretched warm and golden. People gathered in clusters. Kids ran around the fountain that had been shut off for the cold. Hannah wore a thick sweater, hair tied up neatly. She walked slowly, but each step was steadier. A few people recognized us, middle-aged. A woman came over and placed her hand over Hannah's. "I watched your interview. Sweetheart, you don't need to feel ashamed. You've been stronger than most." Hannah froze for a second, eyes welling. She nodded slightly and whispered, "Thanks." When the woman left, I saw Hannah's shoulders tremble, not from fear this time, but from emotion. That night, back at the apartment, Hannah set her hand on the window glass and watched the snow. She spoke softly, barely above a whisper, but clear. "Mom, I think I can still live a new life." I wrapped an arm around her shoulders and rested my chin on her hair. "Not can, Hannah. You will live a new life, and you deserve it." In the days that followed, Hannah started looking for a part-time job at a small cafe near the square. She came home and told me the owner, a widowed woman, hugged her at their first meeting and said, "We don't just sell coffee here, we sell warmth too." My eyes stung hearing that. Maybe the world hadn't completely turned its back. One evening, Hannah brought home a cinnamon loaf from the cafe, set it on the kitchen table, and gave a shy smile. "I want you to try this. It's the first thing I've baked again without shaking." I broke off a piece, and the smell filled our little place. I chewed slowly, then nodded, eyes burning. "It's delicious, sweetheart, the best I've ever had." She laughed, the first full smile in months. In that moment, I knew we'd stepped out of the darkest stretch. As for me, even at my age, I felt reborn inside. I wasn't the mother collapsing in a courtroom, crying under an unjust verdict. I was a woman who stood up, fought, and watched her daughter slowly find the light again. That night before bed, I added to my old notebook, "Today," Hannah smiled again. Rebirth doesn't arrive in a single moment, but in small steps, in each dried tear, in every new smile. We survived, and from here, we will live. I closed the notebook and exhaled. Snow still fell outside, but inside our small apartment, spring had truly begun. That day, I stood in the small church hall near Boise's Square. On stage, Hannah and a few other women were getting ready for her first community meeting since the appeal. In the warm yellow light, I saw my child's smile, not forced anymore, but real and full, like a seedling that had made it through a brutal winter. Her eyes lit up when she talked, when she listened, when a young woman shared her own past. I knew Hannah had returned to life, no longer a lost silhouette in a snowy night. Sitting in the audience, I suddenly remembered that Christmas Eve. The wind whipping my face, the whiteout snow, my daughter curled on a stranger's porch, while behind the glass there was dazzling light, loud laughter, and clinking red wine glasses. In that moment, I thought I'd lost everything. But from that despair, I chose not to stay silent. I ran to my child, wrapped her in my arms, and I have never let go since. This journey taught me something deep. Justice in a courtroom can be bent, but justice from the human heart cannot. People can forge papers, use power to hide the truth, but no one can silence the honest voices of those who have suffered and loved. It was the empathy of the community, the thousands of comments, and the eyes of strangers that pulled us out of the dark. I found myself wondering and asking you, the one listening to my story, what would you do? Would you stay silent to keep a fake peace, keep sitting through cold dinners and contemptuous looks? Or would you stand up shaking, even alone, to reclaim your voice and your dignity for yourself and the person you love? Only you can answer that. But if you've stayed with me this far, I believe you're like me. You believe truth deserves to be spoken, and kindness will find its way to where it's needed. I looked back at Hannah and saw her smiling, clapping for another woman's story. The light in her eyes was the greatest reward for the path I chose. I no longer saw myself as just an older mother fighting injustice. I felt part of something bigger, a current of people who dare to speak up, to protect, to love to the end. And now I want to speak directly to you, the one who patiently stayed with me through this long story. Thank you for listening, for giving me the chance to share, and for letting your heart touch the pain and the hope that Hannah and I have carried. If this story moved you, please leave a comment so I know we're not alone. Please like, subscribe, and watch the next videos. Your company and your sharing are the strength that lets me keep telling these stories about motherhood, resilience, and the justice we sometimes have to win with our own hands. Once again, from the bottom of my heart, I'm grateful. May each of us find our own light, just as Hannah found hers again in today's smile. That morning, I had no reason to leave the house, just a vague hunch that pushed me to grab my keys and drive to the old bank on Maple Street. As I walked in, I saw my daughter-in-law, Brianna, in a cream suit, talking to the branch manager. She was holding a stack of medical papers, her voice clear. She's no longer mentally competent. The doctor has confirmed it. I froze, as if every sound around me vanished. Then a cold truth slammed into my chest. She was plotting to take everything my husband and I had built over 40 years. But Brianna had no idea what I did next that morning would make her pay dearly for every lie. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. I'm Marjorie Hale, 69 years old, a widow for almost 7 years. I live in a small white house in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon, where my husband Robert and I once planted rose bushes along the porch. My life is simple, steady. Make coffee, read the paper, tend a few small cacti, then stroll the neighborhood. I never imagined I'd witness what I did that morning, my own daughter-in-law, standing in a bank, calmly burying my dignity and freedom with a stack of forged documents. Before I walked in, I thought I'd just stop by for a few minutes to check the savings we'd opened back when Robert was alive. I still prefer banking in person over online, partly because I like talking to real people, and partly because I can feel a little of our shared memories there. Everything seemed normal that day. Sunlight through the glass, the smell of coffee from the machine behind the counter, the receptionist's friendly smile. I had no idea that a few more steps would take me straight into a nightmare. I recognized Brianna immediately. She stood about 20 feet away, poised, blonde hair neatly pinned up, her voice crisp like a speech she'd practiced. Beside her was Mr. Jenkins, the branch manager I'd known for years. I used to send him a Christmas card every year. Today, he was listening intently, nodding along. I slowed down and slipped behind the divider between two teller counters. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, instinct kept me from moving closer. I heard Brianna continue, "We just want to make sure Mom's assets are protected. She doesn't recognize many family members anymore. Dr. Whitmore recommended we move forward with legal guardianship before there's a financial risk." I nearly stopped breathing. Dr. Whitmore? I've never seen any doctor by that name. A chill ran down my spine. Through the gap between the panels, I saw her open the file and present it to Mr. Jenkins, an obvious stamp, signatures, medical forms. She added, with practiced sympathy, "This has been very hard for us, but it's necessary." "We?" I repeated silently. "So Daniel knew about this too?" My son, the one who held me when his father died, who promised I'd never be alone now, silently letting his wife stage this entire con. The room went blurry, as if someone had sucked the air out of it. My heart pounded, my hands shook. I gripped my purse strap to steady myself. In my head, I heard Robert's voice, "Don't let anyone lay a hand on what you worked for." I took a deep breath. I couldn't just stand there. I stepped out. The flat heels of my shoes clicked sharply on the polished tile. Heads turned. Mr. Jenkins looked surprised. Brianna whipped around. For a second, her face went pale, then snapped into a fragile smile. "Mom? What are you doing here?" Her voice caught, stiff and unnatural. I straightened, clutching my bag. "I came to check my own accounts," I said, calm enough to surprise myself. "And you seem to be doing that for me?" The lobby's air went heavy. Mr. Jenkins glanced between us, clearly uneasy. Brianna tried a smile. "Oh no, you've misunderstood. I was just making sure everything's safe. The doctor said you've been—" I cut her off, firm. "I've never seen any doctor named Whitmore. And I haven't authorized anyone to handle my finances. It seems we have a serious mix-up here." Mr. Jenkins cleared his throat and turned to Brianna. "Miss Brianna is Mrs. Hale, correct?" Brianna faltered, looking down at the folder, then up again with a shaky smile. "There must be a misunderstanding. I was just trying to get things ready in case she gets confused." My voice dropped harder. "Confused? Like confusing my actual signature with this one?" I held out my hand for the documents. Sensing something wrong, Mr. Jenkins passed them over. I flipped through quickly, and within seconds I saw it. The signature was fake sloppy strokes, missing the distinctive pull I've used my entire life. My pulse jumped. I looked Brianna dead in the eye. "You forged my signature!" Her lips quivered. She forced a laugh. "No, Mom, maybe a teller." "Don't call me Mom," I said, ice cold. "Someone trying to bury me alive while I'm still breathing doesn't get to call me that." The lobby fell silent. The young receptionist froze behind the counter. "Mr.?" Jenkins looked down at the file in my hands, then said more sternly, "Mrs. Hale, I think we should pause this process and verify everything." I nodded, never taking my eyes off Brianna. She swallowed and stepped back, clutching her purse. I saw her gaze wobble, her confidence peeled away. I stepped closer, low enough for only her to hear. "You just signed your own sentence, Brianna." I turned to Mr. Jenkins. "Crisp. Please freeze every account tied to my name and anyone other than me. I'll provide proper identification today." He nodded immediately and signaled a staffer. While he did, Brianna mumbled something incoherent and hurried out, her steps leaden. As the glass door closed behind her, I stayed put. My body shook not from fear but from a cold, steady anger that felt almost like calm. I knew everything had changed. I walked out with the file in my down hand and crossed the lot. Sunlight flashed off the hood, making me squint. I sat behind the wheel and gripped it tight. My heart still hammered, but I knew I'd just secured the first weapon in a fight they didn't realize they'd started. The drive home felt longer than usual. Cold air slid in through the cracked window, carrying the piney scent of the old neighborhood. In the rearview mirror, I saw my own face, tired but not weak. A woman who'd lost a husband and lived with loneliness can endure a lot, but she will not be declared incompetent so someone else can steal what she built. And I knew that morning was only the beginning. If Brianna thought I'd sit quietly while they erased me, she was about to learn the most expensive lesson of her life. Never come for a woman you think is frail when she still remembers every number, every signature, and every secret in the bank. Driving home that morning, Brianna's words kept echoing. "She's no longer mentally competent." The sentence cut through me like a dry, cold blade, and years of memories came rushing back, vivid enough to hurt. I remembered the first day Daniel brought Brianna home. She was in her early 20s, then soft blonde curls, a bright smile, confidence shining in her eyes. I saw my younger self in her, quick, lively, full of spark. Daniel held her hand and looked at me with hope. "Mom, this is the person I want to spend my life with." I smiled, genuinely happy. After years of Daniel burying himself in work, I just wanted him to find someone who made him happy. We held the wedding in the backyard where Robert and I had planted lavender and climbing roses along the white fence. Brianna wore a simple lace dress, glowing in the sunday. I told my best friend that day, "I feel lucky Daniel found a daughter-in-law who's educated and well-mannered." Back then, everyone adored her. Polite, attentive, socially smooth. Family members said, "Your daughter-in-law is a gem." I felt proud, lucky even. Life stayed peaceful until Robert died. After the funeral, the house felt frighteningly empty. The laughter, doors opening, morning greetings gone. Daniel visited often, and a few weeks later, it was Brianna who suggested, "Mom, why don't we move in with you? The house is big, and I can take better care of you." I was surprised, touched. Not many people these days choose to live with their mother-in-law. I asked, "Are you sure?" "I don't want to be a burden." Brianna smiled, touching my shoulder. "Not at all, Mom. We want to be close." I believed her. I believed the way mothers do when they want to see the good in their children. So they moved in. At first it was pleasant. Brianna woke early, made breakfast, asked if I wanted tea or coffee. She called me Mom, in a sweet, sincere tone that made it hard not to respond. Evenings, the three of us ate together, talking about work, neighbors, and memories of Robert. Sometimes I'd look at Daniel's smile and feel a rare peace. "You can rest now, Robert." Brianna even encouraged me to get out more. She signed me up for a senior yoga class nearby and bought me a new teal sweater. One fall evening on the porch, I told stories about the old days when Robert and I started our tiny accounting office. Daniel leaned on his wife's shoulder, smiling. The warm porch light over the three of us made me think I'd found home again. Then, like all things too good to be true, the changes crept in. It started small. One night, when I went to pay the electric bill, Brianna said, "Mom, let me do it. I'm used to these websites, no risk of typing something wrong." She sounded reasonable. I nodded. Help is help. A few weeks later, she said, "Let me reorganize your financial papers, Mom. I can consolidate accounts so they're easier to track." "Everything's online now." I hesitated, but Daniel chimed in. "Let Brianna handle it, Mom. She's great at this." She studied finance. So I gave her the file cabinet key, then, little by little, my online banking passwords. All because I trusted that a daughter-in-law helps her mother-in-law. At first, she reported every expense. She printed statements, left them on the kitchen table, even used pink sticky notes. Plumber, $85. Car insurance, $140. I appreciated the neatness. I even told a neighbor, "I'm so lucky my daughter-in-law handles everything. I don't have to worry." I didn't realize I was cutting the last thread between me and my autonomy. Time passed, and the help became habit. Every new bill, "I'll handle it, Mom. You rest." Then she started retrieving my bank mail. She said, "Mail's mostly ads now. I'll screen it first, saves time." I nodded, unconcerned. I trusted too much. One morning I checked the mailbox earlier than usual, empty. Brianna stood in the kitchen holding a few envelopes. She flinched when I walked in, then forced a smile. "I was going to bring these up for you." I smiled back, not suspecting a thing. Daniel got busier out early, home late. Brianna ran the house. Meals, finances, repairs, taxes. I felt like a guest in my own home, but told myself, the kids want to help. Nothing wrong with that. Late one night, trying to confirm a routine checkup, I found my bank email password had changed. I asked Brianna. She smiled. "I updated security." "Don't worry, I saved everything." I nodded, though something felt off. I pushed the doubt away. But the truth is, every time I gave up a small bit of control, I handed Brianna a bigger piece of power. I remember New Year's Eve when I wanted to donate to Robert's favorite charity. Brianna stopped me. "Mom, wait until the new year. We've got lots of expenses at the end of the month." I stayed quiet. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had to ask permission to use my own money. Only when I sat in that bank and saw her holding papers with my name stamped on them did I realize this had been set up for a long time. Every small step, every sweet word, every dutiful gesture, just a polished cover for a scheme I helped enable. The worst part wasn't the betrayal, it was knowing I'd smiled and opened the door for the betrayer to walk right in. I don't know exactly when things went off track, but the smallest details always spoke first. One morning I checked the mailbox like usual. I love flipping through a paper or two, a few envelopes, sometimes a postcard from an old friend. But that day, it was empty, just a torn ad. I figured the mail was late and forgot about it. The next day and the next, same thing. I asked Brianna, "Have you seen my mail?" "It's been a week, no bills or notices." She answered lightly, "They probably switched to electronic, Mom. I set that up so nothing gets lost." I nodded, it made sense. But when I asked for statements or forms to sign, she said, "Don't worry, I printed everything. I'll hold on to it so it doesn't get misplaced." Soon, nothing arrived at my address. Even thank you letters from charities I'd supported for years disappeared. I chalked it up to the times everything online now. Only when I saw a new bank card did I pause. One afternoon, Brianna walked in, beaming. "Mom, the bank sent you a new card." They upgraded their security and reissued everyone. She held it up, then added casually, "Let me keep it for you since you tend to leave your wallet in your coat." I hesitated, then let it go. She'd been paying bills for months after all. I smiled and nodded. She slipped the card into her own wallet like it already belonged there. I started to feel out of control without knowing why. Then the doctor's appointments. I've kept regular checkups every 6 months since Robert passed. I called to confirm my slot, and the nurse sounded surprised. "Mrs. Hale, we got a message from your family to move it to next month." I froze. "From my family? Who called?" She said, A woman named Brianna Hale. She said you were tired and needed more rest. A tightness caught in my throat. I'd never authorized that. When I asked Brianna, she smiled, too gentle to be angry at. I thought you forgot. You said you weren't ready that day, so I rescheduled. I shook my head. I don't remember saying that. She laughed. You've had a lot on your mind. That answer, which sounded harmless, kept me up all night. I began to realize that whenever something seemed off, Brianna always had a soft, reasonable explanation, so reasonable it made me doubt myself. Daniel, my son, seemed more distant by the day. He used to ask, "Did you sleep well, Mom? Do you need my help with anything?" Now it was different. He came home late, and dinner was usually just two women sitting across from each other. When I asked him, "Have you noticed I'm getting less mail lately, or that my doctor's appointments keep getting moved?" He brushed it off. "Brianna's probably handling that for you. She's good at this stuff." His voice was flat, not a hint of concern. I looked at my son and felt my throat tighten. Did he not know, or did he choose not to? Then one day, I stumbled onto something I couldn't talk myself out of. That afternoon, I went to the bank alone to take out some cash for a gift for my granddaughter. The teller I knew pulled up my account, looked at the screen, and said, "Would you like to confirm the transfer from last Tuesday?" I frowned. "Last Tuesday? I didn't make any transfer." She turned the screen toward me. A receipt for a transfer of $2,800 to an account under the name Hale Consulting LLC. I'd never heard of it. At the bottom was my signature, or more accurately, a clumsy version of it. My skin prickled, my heart raced. I asked for a printed copy and took it home. That evening I showed it to Brianna and asked, "What is this?" "This statement shows a company I've never heard of." She glanced at it and gave a thin smile. "Probably a bank error. I'll call them tomorrow and get it fixed." Then she slipped the paper out of my hand so fast I couldn't hold on to it. "Don't worry, Mom, everything's safe." I studied her face, trying to find a hint of embarrassment or remorse. Nothing. Calm, almost confident. That night I sat alone in the living room, the warm light falling on the family photos on the wall. In one frame I'm smiling between Daniel and Brianna, their hands on my shoulders. Back then, I thought I had everything. Now, looking again, all I saw was something hollow and unfamiliar. I started thinking about the old days, me and Robert working late in our tiny downtown Portland office, my hands always ink-stained while he made me coffee. We built every dollar with sweat and trust. And now, in just a few months, a young woman was taking it all piece by piece with polished charm and caring words. From that day, I paid closer attention. I quietly checked the file cabinet. Several folders were gone. Some envelopes I'd tucked away in a drawer had vanished. And the bank card? Brianna still kept it for me. I realized I no longer truly knew what was happening with my own finances. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman being pushed to the edge of her own life. Not by shouting or force, but by sweetness, by words so gentle they numbed my defenses. That's when I began to understand. Not everyone who takes from you breaks in through the door. Some walk in with a smile and a warm "Mom." And only when it's too late do you see they didn't come to love you, they came to take your place in your own home. Nothing special happened that morning. The Oregon sky was a rare, clear blue after days of rain, the first rays slipping through the curtains onto the polished wood floor. I made coffee like usual, turned on the local radio, and heard about a traffic jam on the Morrison Bridge. Everything was normal until something felt very wrong. A low restlessness pressed in my chest, like someone whispering that I had to go somewhere, right now. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just the fatigue of age. The more I tried to ignore it, the louder it became, a quiet, stubborn call. I set down my cup, grabbed my keys. Maybe I just need some air, I told myself. No makeup, no change of clothes, just my gray cardigan and the soft-soled, worn shoes I wear to the market. I didn't know where I was going, but my hand had already turned the key and started the old Subaru. Instinct took me to the Maple Street branch, the small bank where Robert and I had saved for more than 40 years. That place held so many memories. Opening our first account after the wedding, Robert's big smile when we finally paid off the house, the day I set a new passbook on the desk and said, "We did it." I parked beside the row of maples just turning yellow. Sunlight flashed on the building's large glass, reflecting my shadow on the pavement. I stepped out, pulled my sweater tight, and felt a cool breeze slip through my hair. It was so quiet I could hear twigs snapping under my heels. The glass door opened. The air smelled faintly of coffee and freshly printed paper. Everything was just as I remembered: the light wood reception desk, the carefully vacuumed blue carpet, and the photo behind the counter, serving our community since 1974. But within seconds, I knew something was wrong. At the far end by the branch manager's desk stood a woman, and I'd know that posture anywhere: Brianna. She wore an elegant cream suit, blonde hair pinned high, makeup flawless enough to erase any trace of fatigue. Beside her stood Mr. Jenkins, the branch manager who sent flowers when Robert passed. He was bent over a thick file Brianna had set down, while she spoke in a voice that was soft, confident, completely composed. I stopped behind the stone column near the entrance, not ready to say hello. From there, I heard every word Brianna said. "Mrs. Marjorie Hale is no longer able to manage her finances," she said softly but clearly. "Her physician has confirmed progressive cognitive decline, so we just want to finalize legal guardianship. It's all in her best interest." It felt like someone yanked the rug from under me. My breath caught. For a moment, I didn't know if I was awake or dreaming. Mrs. Marjorie Hale, my own name, echoed through the familiar lobby like they were talking about someone dead. Brianna went on, even offering a polite smile. "Here's a copy of the medical record. Dr. Whitmore confirms mild dementia and recommends limiting independent financial activity." I watched her open the file and hand it to Mr. Jenkins. White paper, a round red stamp, a sloppy signature. Even from a distance I could read the first line: "Patient, Marjorie Hale, 69 years old." I went numb. That was my name, my age, and they were twisting my life. In that moment, the pieces of the last few months snapped into place like a cruel puzzle. No mail at home, a new bank card, rescheduled appointments, and now this paper, the final piece I didn't want to see. A cold ache spread through me. I felt like I wasn't standing on the floor anymore, like I was watching from above as my daughter-in-law, the one who called me Mom, calmly erased me from my own life. Brianna kept talking in that steady, administrative tone. "We don't want the accounts to be abused. She's forgetful at times. This is just to protect my mother-in-law." Protect. She said it with pity, and I heard the sweet poison in her words. I looked around. A few customers sat waiting, no one paying. Attention. Only me, the person truly on trial without being in the courtroom. I wanted to step out and shout that I was lucid, that this was fraud, that Dr. Whitmore didn't exist. But my feet felt nailed to the floor. My hand trembled. I gripped my pocket to steady it. I heard Mr. Jenkins's voice. "I understand, Miss Brianna. We just need to verify a few details before we transfer authority." I closed my eyes for a second. A flash Robert's gentle smile in our small kitchen years ago. "Never let anyone else hold the title to what you've built." I opened my eyes, took a breath, and felt anger rise steady, no longer afraid. For the first time in my life, I knew what it meant to be betrayed by someone you trusted completely. I tightened my grip on my purse and walked toward the desk. My heels struck the tile in firm beats. A few people turned. Brianna kept talking, unaware I was almost there. I had only one thought. If she could write me out of my own story, then right here where she chose to bury me, she would face the truth. So I took one more step, ready for the confrontation that, I later realized, changed everything. The air in the lobby felt thick. I stood at the entry, inhaled, squared my shoulders, and moved forward. My steps weren't just footsteps, they were the start of a fight. Heads lifted, conversations stopped. Morning light flashed on the glass, throwing a long shadow of me across the stone floor. Brianna stood by the manager's desk, still holding the pen she'd just used. At the sound of my steps, she flinched and turned. For a split second, her face froze, then melted into a flimsy smile to hide the panic. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Her voice was dry and strained, like she was trying not to choke. The branch manager, Mr. Jenkins, looked unsettled. He stared at me like he'd seen a ghost. "Mrs. Hale, I thought you weren't able to." I stopped at the desk and looked straight at Brianna. "You might want to say that again, Brianna," I said slowly. "The incompetent person you just described to him, she's standing right in front of you." The room went rigid. A few people in the waiting area looked up, holding their breath. Brianna clutched the edge of the desk, her eyes drifting for a beat. "Mom, Quiet." I didn't raise my voice, but the tone silenced her. I held out my hand, voice like steel. "Give me the file you just submitted." "Mr." Jenkins hesitated, but my eyes didn't leave room for refusal. He handed it over. The paper was warm, still smelling of fresh ink. I opened it and read. It didn't take long. The flaws jumped out in seconds. My signature sloppy, tentative strokes, a smeared red stamp. The line, "Physician, Dr. Andrew Whitmore," tightened my jaw. I did accounting for decades, read hundreds of legal files. I knew that stamp wasn't from any real medical board. I looked up, set the file on the desk, and turned it so Mr. Jenkins could see. "These papers are fake. The stamp uses the wrong font. This doctor doesn't have a license in Oregon. And this signature," I tapped the first page, "is not mine." "Mr." Jenkins frowned and took a closer look. His face shifted from surprise to displeasure. Brianna stood her ground, trying to keep her voice steady. "You're misunderstanding, Mom. I just wanted to keep your money safe. You've been forgetful, and I was afraid someone might take advantage." I cut in, low, and clipped. "Protect me?" With forged medical records, a forged signature, and a plan to declare me incompetent so you could take it all? She blanched, stepping back half a pace. "No, I wasn't trying to—" I took out my phone, started recording, letting the beep sound aloud. "Mr. Jenkins," I said, eyes still on Brianna. "Please confirm who submitted this file this morning?" He hesitated, then answered. "Miss Brianna Hale. You weren't present." "Good." I turned to Brianna. "Everything you say from now on is on record. I won't let anyone rewrite my story." She swallowed and tried to steady herself, but her voice shook. "Please stop, Mom. You're making everyone misunderstand." "I was only trying to help." I cut in, sharp as a thin blade. "You weren't helping. You were taking. You erased me from my own life and planned to stand in my place." She inhaled hard, then tried to swing back. "You're embarrassing the family. People will think I'm a terrible person." I met her eyes, cool. "No need to think. Now they know." A murmur spread through the lobby. Tellers pretended to work but kept glancing over. "Mr." Jenkins motioned to a staffer, likely to call legal. I stood tall, eyes never leaving Brianna. "I want every one of my accounts frozen immediately, including any joint accounts with her name. And Mr. Jenkins, please prepare a written incident record. I'll sign and take a copy for my attorney." He nodded, face grave. "We'll take care of it right away, Mrs. Hale." I heard the rapid clacking of keys, then a printer. Brianna sank into a chair, chalk white. She forced out a weak line. "You'll regret this. You're tearing this family apart." I answered, low and measured. "No, Brianna. Truth doesn't destroy a family. Only lies laid as its foundation do." She broke into tears. Not out of remorse I knew too well, but out of fear. Fear of what she couldn't control anymore. Mr. Jenkins handed me the file stamped for temporary hold, his tone formal. You can take this to your lawyer. We'll send the originals to Regional for legal review. I took it and tucked it neatly away. Then I looked at Brianna one last time. She stared down, shoulders shaking, blonde hair covering half her face. I wasn't angry anymore. What I felt was cold, clean, and hard as metal. I said, softly, just for the two of them to hear, I let you into my home. I gave you chances. I trusted you. And you paid me back with a careful betrayal. But you forgot something, Brianna. I don't quit when I'm underestimated. I turned to Mr. Jenkins with a faint smile. Thank you. I think I've taken enough of your time. He nodded and stepped back. I turned and walked out. Each step was slow, steady. Behind me, Brianna's hoarse voice rose. You can't do this. I'm the only one taking care of you. I stopped at the threshold without looking back and said quietly, if that's your idea of care, I'll take care of myself. The glass doors slid open and the wind rushed in. The noon sun was bright enough to sting. I squinted, but inside I'd never seen more clearly. The breeze lifted the hem of my gray sweater like a flag just raised. I drew a long breath, the crisp autumn air filling my chest. In the car window's reflection, my face looked older, maybe, but my eyes weren't weak. I was still the woman who'd weathered enough storms to know that some battles you don't choose, but once you're pushed into them, you win. I opened the door and glanced back in the rear view. Brianna stood there, small in the reflected light. I lifted one corner of my mouth, not from joy, but because her mask had finally fallen. When the engine started, it blended with the wind. What happened in that lobby wasn't just a counterpunch. It was the beginning of a fight, one with no room for mercy. As I turned onto Maple Street, sun filtered through blazing maples onto the steering wheel, and I whispered a promise to myself. From today on, no one writes my life for me. When I pulled into the driveway, the late afternoon sun was fading. Maple Street was as calm as if nothing had happened. Inside me, everything had shifted. I turned off the engine and sat for a long moment, hands still wrapped around the wheel. From a distance, I saw a figure on the porch. Daniel, my son. He stood, with his arms crossed, face set like he was bracing for a storm. The door opened, and there was Brianna on the sofa, eyes red, tissue in hand. Months ago, I might have softened at the sight. Now, it looked like a clumsy play. I walked in and set my bag down. The house was so quiet it felt heavy. No one spoke for several seconds. Only the clock ticked, and my heart beat slow and steady. Daniel spoke first, trying to steady his voice, but I heard the wobble. Mom, I think you're misunderstanding. Brianna, she only wants what's best for you. I looked at my son for a long time. Those eyes once filled me with pride. Now they hurt. What's best for me? I asked softly but firmly. I took the file from my bag and set it on the coffee table. The dry thud echoed in the still room. Is forging my signature what's best? Brianna let out a small sob, fists clenched at her skirt like she was the victim. Daniel glanced at her, then back at me. His eyes dodged mine, unable to hold my gaze. In them I saw not just confusion, but fear of losing the fragile comfort he was clinging to. Mom, he said slowly, his voice fading. She just thought you needed help. She didn't mean to. I cut him off, my voice lower, but so cold it even chilled me. Didn't mean to? She brought forged papers to the bank, said I'm no longer competent, and signed my name on a power of attorney form. You call that didn't mean to, Daniel? No one answered. Brianna lowered her face, tears running down her cheeks, but I knew she wasn't crying out of remorse. She was performing, and the only audience she needed to convince was Daniel. I turned to my son, forcing my voice to stay calm. Do you know what they told me this morning? that she's no longer capable of managing her finances, that I need a legal guardian. Daniel clenched his fists but still said, "Nothing." "What does your silence mean, Daniel?" I asked, my voice starting to shake with anger. "Do you agree with her? Do you think I've actually lost my mind?" He looked up, pain in his eyes. "No, Mom, I don't think that. But lately you've been forgetting things, misplacing papers, mixing up appointment dates. Brianna's just worried." I let out a dry laugh, the sound slicing through the room like a knife. "Worried? She rescheduled my appointments without asking. She keeps my bank card, opens my email, intercepts my mail, and now she wants full control of my assets. You think that's worry, Daniel?" The air in the house sank. I glanced around the kitchen behind us, still had breakfast dishes in the sink, the faint smell of coffee lingering. The heart of the home, once warm with laughter, had turned into a cold battlefield. I looked at Daniel, slow and aching. "Do you know what hurts me most?" He didn't answer. I nodded slightly. "It's not that Brianna deceived me. It's that you let her. You didn't protect me." "You protected the person who's hurting me?" Daniel closed his eyes as if my words hit harder than any blow. Brianna sobbed louder, grabbing for her husband's hand. "I'm sorry, Daniel. I didn't want it to end up like this." I looked at her, my voice hoarse from holding back. "Don't apologize to him." "Apologize to yourself for forgetting what integrity is worth." Daniel stood, took a deep breath, and shoved his hands into his pockets. He avoided my eyes, staring out the window where the late afternoon sun lit up the row of blazing red maples. "I need to step outside," he said quietly. "Good," I replied. "You should, because in here, I need air to breathe." He nodded without looking at me and walked out. The front door closed so softly it was almost silent, but the sound still left me hollow. I stood in the living room, staring at the 2 half-finished teacups on the table, one mine, one Brianna's. The tea had gone cold, the surface darkening into a dull brown stain. That small scene made the truth plain. Not everything breaks with a sound. Some things shatter in silence. I gathered the documents, stacked them neatly on the table, and turned away. Behind me, Brianna still sat with her head bowed, shoulders trembling. I felt no pity anymore. I knew Daniel's silence wasn't just weakness. It was a choice, a cruel choice between 2 women, his wife and his mother, and he chose the one who knows how to play fragile instead of the one who raised him. As the last light of day slid across the floor, I stood in the kitchen where my family's laughter once echoed. Now, there was only the sound of wind slipping through the doorframe. I poured a glass of water, my hand trembled slightly, but my eyes were dry. I understood that some wounds can't be healed with tears. Some losses don't come from death, but from the moment someone turns their back on the truth. And that afternoon, when Daniel walked out without looking back, I knew from now on I could only rely on myself. What do you think? What happens when the person you trust most is the very one who forces you to become stronger than you thought you could be? Share your thoughts in the comments. I truly want to hear your perspective. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was still, with only the clock ticking in dry, steady beats, like time scratching at my chest. I sat by the window, looking out at the front yard where the streetlight spilled onto a thin crust of thawed snow. The quiet wasn't peace, it was the pause before a storm. Outside, the wind hissed softly through the maples. I wrapped a wool scarf tighter and stared at the home I'd lived in for more than 40 years. Every corner, every photo on the wall, every teacup with an old lipstick stain witnesses to a life of hard work and honesty. And yet in just a few, for months, it could all be erased by a forged paper and a few lies. I let out a smile without joy. If Brianna thought I'd sit still and lose, she was badly mistaken. I stood and walked to the wooden cabinet by the dining room where Robert kept an old safe. No one knew what was inside, not even Daniel. I knelt and wiped the dust from the dial. The numbers had faded, but my hands remembered the sequence muscle memory carved by years. A soft click sounded as the lock released. Inside were a few old notebooks, a velvet box with Robert's wedding ring, and a small black USB drive. I picked it up, my palm cold. This was the key to everything Robert and I had built: shares in the old logistics company, investment certificates, and even the hidden accounts Robert used to call for emergencies. When he died, I had planned to seal it all away, but now that my daughter-in-law wanted to erase me from my own life, the emergency had arrived. I sat down, plugged the USB into my laptop. The screen lit up and folders appeared one by one: Hale Holdings, Maple Street Property, Trust Account, Nora, all intact. I opened each file, skimming numbers, e-signatures, and stock transactions only Robert and I knew. Every line was now a weapon. I opened my notebook and wrote a list of what to do. 1. Check the status of shares at Hale Holdings. 2. Freeze all joint accounts. 3. Transfer temporary control to the attorney. 4. Compile evidence of forgery. By the last line, my pen shook. Not from fear, but from loneliness. The only person I could trust now was Pauline, the attorney who'd worked with us for over 20 years. I reached for my phone and checked the time. It was close to 11 p.m., but I knew she would be awake. Pauline never sleeps early. After 3 rings, she picked up. Her voice was steady and low, even at that hour. "Marjorie, calling this late, what happened?" I took a breath and told her everything. Every detail: the bank incident, the fake documents, Daniel's silence, Brianna's tears. I left nothing out, and on the other end, Pauline listened without interrupting. Now and then I heard the light scratch of her pen. When I finished, her voice came back, calm but firm. "I know you're strong enough not to break, but right now, the most important thing is not to react loudly. Let them believe you're weak." I frowned. "You want me to pretend?" "Not pretend," Pauline said. "Strategy. The quieter you are, the more careless they'll be. You need time to gather proof and prepare a counterclaim. I'll recheck Robert's paperwork, especially the hidden accounts no one knows about. We'll make sure they never see it coming." I sat quietly for a while, looking out the window where the moonlight reflected on the glass. Her words warmed me. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel alone. "Pauline," I said softly, "thank you. But I don't want to only defend. I want accountability." "And you'll have it," she said. "First, let me secure everything legally. Tomorrow I'll send you a temporary authorization form. Sign and return it. Tonight, start archiving anything suspicious. You did accounting, you know how." I smiled. "Yes, I did. Recordings, photos, saving every detail, every email, every line on a statement, every conversation. Nothing would slip past me again." After we hung up, I sat a long time. The lamp cast a pool of gold over the papers. My shadow stretched across the table. The room was silent except for the clock and the wind under the door. I felt a strange strength rising, not anger, but clarity. I opened a drawer and took out the small recorder Robert used in meetings. I replaced the batteries and tested it. 1, 2, 3. My voice sounded clear and steady. I slipped it into my pocket with my phone. Before bed, I opened the laptop again and created a new folder. I named it Aurora because Robert used to call me that whenever he said, "You shine brightest when cornered by darkness." I locked the USB back in the safe, turned the dial, and heard the familiar click. Then I stood and looked around the dim room. Everything looked the same, but I knew that from tonight on, every step I took would have purpose. Brianna thinks I'm just a frail old woman. Daniel thinks I'll endure in silence. Neither understands that when a mother is betrayed, what she loses isn't trust, it's mercy. And when the first morning light touched the window, I was ready for the quiet war. I was about to start not with shouting, but with evidence, numbers, and recordings sharp enough to cut. That night I sat and watched the sunrise, whispering a promise only I could hear. I will take back everything with silence, sharper than a blade. The next morning, a veil of fog hung over the sky. I was at the kitchen table pretending to read the paper when I heard Brianna's car pull up hard out front. Her heels hammered down the hallway. The door flew open so fast the picture frames rattled. She stormed in, face tight with anger, eyes red from no sleep. "What did you do to the secondary account?" she snapped, the sweetness gone. "The bank says my access is suspended. They said it was on your orders." I folded the paper, looked up calmly as if I had no idea. "Oh? Maybe it's a security audit. They're careful these days." Brianna let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Don't play dumb, Mom. I know exactly what you're doing. You want to cut me out?" I only shrugged and didn't answer. A spark of rage flashed in her eyes. She spun and shouted, "Daniel, get down here now!" A few seconds later, my son came down the stairs, face tired, dark circles under his eyes. "What's going on?" Brianna turned, and the tears turned on like a switch. "Your mom locked all the accounts, even our savings. I can't pay the insurance or Nora's tuition. She's punishing me!" Daniel frowned and looked at me, wary and conciliatory at once. "Mom, is that true? Why didn't you tell us first?" I answered evenly. "That account is in my name. I'm protecting my own money." Brianna burst into tears, covering her face. "See, Daniel? I told you. Your mom never trusted me. She thinks I'm a thief in this house." She turned to him, voice trembling but edged like a blade. "Do something. If she doesn't hand over control, we have nothing. This house, even that little company you're working at, it's all in her name. If she changes the will, we lose everything." I watched them in silence like an outsider. Daniel hesitated, twisting the hem of his shirt. He wasn't cruel enough to take my side, and not brave enough to stand up to his wife. Seeing him falter, Brianna stepped closer, tears streaming, her voice cutting. "What about Nora? She needs a future, stability. Your mom grips everything like we're outsiders. If you don't make her sign the power of attorney again, don't blame me for doing what you won't like." I recognized the threat instantly. It wasn't the first time I'd seen her use tears to manipulate. But this time I didn't feel pain, only the clarity of watching her slide deeper into the trap she set. Daniel dropped his gaze, voice small. "I'll talk to Mom." "But Brianna, don't make this worse." She inhaled sharply and nodded, but triumph flickered in her eyes. I said nothing. I simply stood and went to my study. Behind me, their voices faded and then stopped. I closed the door, leaned back in my chair, and woke my computer. On the desk, my phone lit up with a system alert. Interior cameras restored. I smiled to myself. No one knew that last week I'd asked Pauline to contact Robert's old tech to restore the entire security system, the one Brianna had accidentally disconnected. Now every corner of the house could capture every conversation, gesture, and glance. I opened the playback and selected the last hour. On screen, Brianna sat close to Daniel in the living room, her voice tight, her face twisted with anger. "You have to make her sign the trust again. Once she loses signing authority, this house will be ours. After that, we do what we want." I paused the frame, scrubbed back, and played it again, listening to each word clearly. "This house will be ours." I leaned back and drew a long breath. My heart pounded not from shock, but from certainty. Everything stood naked now. She wasn't pretending to be the dutiful daughter-in-law anymore. I saved the video as Brianna Proof 1. Then I opened the kitchen camera, their conversation afterward. Daniel sat with his head down while she stood close, voice low. "If you won't do it, I'll tell the lawyer she needs guardianship. Once the medical file goes in, she won't be able to fight." I paused again. My hand trembled slightly, but my eyes were brighter than ever. There was no room left for doubt or hope that they'd realize their mistake. The part of me that pitied them died the second I heard, This house will be ours. I moved the cursor to cloud backup. Pauline had set up a private encrypted drive for me. Every piece of evidence would be mirrored there, safe and untouchable. I sat watching the screen for a long time. The pain was gone. All that remained was the stillness of someone who has seen the truth to the end. What I felt now was resolve cold and precise, like a surgeon's blade. Robert used to say, "When they think you're weak, that's when you're strongest." I smiled a little. Yes, right now they think I'm weak, alone, and beaten. That certainty will be what breaks them. I jotted a note. October 14th, 8:42 a.m. Brianna threatens Daniel. Quote, "Once she loses signing authority, this house will be ours." I closed the notebook and set down the pen. Outside, gray clouds gathered and wind scraped the window like a warning. But inside me, the wind had changed. When I stepped out of the room, Brianna was in the hallway pretending to wipe tears. She looked at me with a strained smile. "Mom, can we talk?" I tilted my head and answered softly, almost flat. "Of course, but this time I'll be the one listening, and you should choose every word carefully." She froze for a moment, and in her eyes I saw for the first time a flicker of real fear. I kept walking down the stairs, my legs steadier than ever. In my head the plan was set. No need to shout, no need to strike back with anger. I only needed the truth, and I had it in my hands. Outside, the sky was turning a deep gray. A storm was coming, but this time I would be the one holding the eye. And when it passed, only the liars would be swept away. I've always believed every storm has its time, and that Sunday night was exactly when it needed to break. I chose dinner as usual. The meal was set out at 7 o'clock, just like all the years since Robert was alive. On the table was the beef stew Daniel loves, and the apple pie Nora always asks for seconds of. I arranged everything as if nothing were out of the ordinary. At first, the atmosphere was calm. Brianna forced a smile, Daniel tried to look composed, and I stayed quiet, slowly pouring water into the glasses. The kitchen lights cast a soft yellow glow warm enough to hide the ice underneath. I heard spoons touch plates, thin laughter mixed with strain. It felt like the whole house was holding its breath, waiting for me to begin. When Daniel set down his knife, I spoke gently, my voice so even it surprised me. "This is a good meal. I'm glad we're all sitting together again." Brianna smiled, tight and brittle. "Yes, I think we should forget the past and start over." I tilted my head at her, a smile that didn't reach my staying eyes. "I think so too. But before we start over, there's a small thing I want you both to hear." The room went still. I reached into my handbag on the chair and took out my phone. In a few seconds, the screen's light reflected on their faces. I opened the folder. I'd prepared the file named Brianna Proof 1. I set the phone in the middle of the table and pressed play. Brianna's voice rang out clear, cold, filling the small kitchen like a sentence being read. "You have to make her sign the trust again. Once she loses signing authority, this house will be ours." The air froze. Daniel stared at the phone screen, his lips parting without sound. Brianna went pale, eyes wide, hands stiff on her lap. A few seconds later, she let out a sharp, brittle laugh, trying to steady herself. "Mom, are you serious? I was just joking. Who would actually say something like that?" I didn't answer. I stopped that recording and played the second one. This time it was her threatening Daniel, voice low and controlled. "If you won't do it, I'll tell the lawyer she needs guardianship. Once the medical file goes in, she won't be able to fight." I paused and looked straight at Brianna. "Also a joke?" No one laughed. Daniel sat frozen, hands on the table, his face bone white. I watched his eyes flick between me and his wife, like someone waking up in the middle of a nightmare. I opened my bag and pulled out a thick folder. The cover had the bank's logo, Belmont Branch, and a legal verification seal. I set it neatly in the center of the table, my voice soft but clear. "This is the bank's verification. Every document Brianna filed the other day. Fake medical forms, forged signatures, invalid seals, all confirmed as forgery. I slid the folder toward them. The paper skimmed across the wood with a small sound that felt heavy as stone. Daniel's hands shook as he opened the pages, eyes moving over the red stamps, the words, "Forgery identified." His hands trembled, then stopped at the signature line. "Oh God," he whispered. "Is this real?" I answered evenly. "Real." And if I hadn't gone to the bank that day, she would have succeeded. Brianna shot to her feet, voice catching. "No, I wasn't trying to take anything. I just wanted to help you. You've been forgetting things. I was scared." "Scared?" I cut in, eyes fixed on her. "You weren't scared of me being weak, Brianna. You were scared I was still clear." She stood frozen, then tears spilled over. Daniel still hadn't lifted his head. His hands covered his face. The kitchen was dead quiet. The only sound the clock ticking on the wall, keeping time for a funeral march. I looked at my son. For the first time, he seemed small, not in age, but under the weight of shame. "Son," I said softly, "you once promised you wouldn't let anyone hurt me. But today, you sat still and watched it happen." Daniel opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He only bowed his head, voice breaking. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't answer right away." I gave a small nod, then turned to Brianna. She had collapsed into the chair, shoulders shaking. All that was left of her now was smeared makeup and raw fear. I spoke, light but sharp as a thin blade. "I'm not crazy, Brianna. I'm more awake than you think." It was like the oxygen disappeared. The words rang out, spread through the kitchen, and fell onto the cold tile like a bell ending the service. I pulled out my chair and sat again, carefully stacking the papers, the recordings, the confirmations. My voice stayed even, not loud, not soft, just enough. All of this is stored legally. One copy at my attorney's office, one in a secure drive. I don't need to shout, and I don't need to beg anyone to believe me. The truth knows how to speak for itself. Daniel was silent for a long time. Finally, he lifted his head, eyes red, and murmured, "I didn't think." "Brianna, why did you do it?" Brianna looked at him, sobbing. I was afraid of losing everything." "Your mom never shares. She always acts like she's the only one who's right." "I just wanted a little control, a little security." I looked at her and sighed. "Security? You can't build security on lies, Brianna. You can buy comfort, but you can't buy back trust once it's gone." She dropped her head and cried like a child. Daniel just sat there, eyes empty, hands limp. I stood and gathered the papers, my voice barely more than a breeze. "I won't call the police tonight. But tomorrow morning, I'll be with my attorney. I can't live with you two for one more day." No one stopped me. Only Brianna's muffled sobs trailed behind. I walked to the sink, laid my hand on the cold stone, and looked out the window. Beyond it was the garden Robert used to tend, now swallowed by the dark. In the glass, I saw my face older, harder, but no longer trembling. Behind me, I heard Daniel say softly, like someone who'd just lost something precious, "Mom, I don't know what to say." I turned back and smiled, light as air. "Then don't say anything. Just listen." I walked slowly toward the door and stopped at the threshold. "I spent my life teaching you right from wrong, but in the end, you made me do the opposite, teach someone else a lesson in honesty, and you're going to witness it." I didn't look back. I went straight up the stairs, leaving behind a kitchen that had once been warm, now thick with the smell of cold food and dense silence. At the top step, I heard Daniel call out, voice tight with tears, "Mom, I'm sorry." I stopped without turning and spoke quietly, steady but firm. "I know, but sorry isn't an end. It's just the start of waking up." Then I kept going, step by steady step, like someone who had just crossed the threshold of the past and was walking straight into the light of truth. On the morning of the trial, a light rain fell. I went to the Belmont County Courthouse with Pauline, the friend and attorney, who'd stood by me these past months. She opened a black umbrella, covering half of me from the gray drizzle. The air carried the metallic chill of iron just like my mood, hard, with no room for mercy. The courthouse grounds were unusually crowded. A few local reporters stood outside, taking notes and photos. News of the inheritance fraud case where a mother was betrayed by her daughter-in-law had spread over the past few days, drawing curiosity. I didn't look at them. I walked slowly, my old black shoes hitting the stone steps in solid, certain taps. Pauline laid a hand on my shoulder, her voice low and firm. "You made it here, Marjorie, now let justice speak." I nodded. In my hands was a thick file, every piece of evidence, from recordings and videos to bank statements, numbered and neatly sealed. Each page was the result of sleepless nights under a warm lamp, writing down every small detail. When we entered the courtroom, Brianna was already there. She sat beside her own attorney, hair perfectly styled, makeup meticulous, but her eyes couldn't hide the panic. Daniel sat behind her, not at her table. My son's face was gaunt, like he'd aged 10 years in a few weeks. The judge was Eleanor Fitch, a woman around 60, stern but fair. When she struck the gavel, the sound split the room in two, truth on one side, lies on the other. Pauline stood and spoke briefly but sharply. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Marjorie Hale, was exploited and deceived by her own daughter-in-law, Brianna Hale. This individual forged medical records and signatures and used my client's bank accounts to attempt to seize her assets, in clear violation of elder protection laws and financial fraud statutes." I sat still, eyes on the bench, not looking at Brianna, but I heard her quick, shallow breaths, and I felt a tightness in my chest. Not pity, regret for someone who destroyed herself with ambition. Brianna's attorney stood, talking fast, trying to sound calm. "Your Honor, my client acted out of genuine concern. She believed her mother-in-law was experiencing cognitive issues and simply wanted to manage finances to avoid risk. This was a misunderstanding. There was no intent to steal." Pauline gave a faint smile, the kind that belongs to someone who already knows she'll win. She opened her case and set a small USB drive on the evidence table. "If it was a misunderstanding, then let the court hear my opposing party's own voice." The room went silent. When the recording played, every word cut the air like a blade. "You have to make her sign the trust again. Once she loses signing authority, this house will be ours." Brianna's voice filled the courtroom, clear, cold, precise. No one spoke, only the sound of rain at the windows. Judge Eleanor raised an eyebrow and leaned forward. Pauline played the second clip, Brianna's threat to Daniel. "If you won't do it, I'll tell the lawyer she needs guardianship. Once the medical file goes in, she won't be able to fight." When it ended, there was nothing left to say. Brianna sat frozen, hands clasped together, shaking. The judge looked at her, voice stern. "Miss Hale, is that your voice?" Brianna swallowed hard, lips trembling. I don't remember." "Maybe someone edited," Eleanor cut in, firm. "Forensic audio confirms no edits. The voice is a 100% match. Do you have anything else to add?" No reply. Brianna bowed her head, shoulders curling like the air had doubled in weight. Pauline submitted more verified bank documents, statements, confirmation of forged signatures, and a report from the real physician who stated he never signed any diagnosis of cognitive impairment. Everything laid out precise, airtight. The judge reviewed each page, eyes cold as steel. Finally, she set the stack down and looked straight at Brianna. "These actions are not only civil violations, they are criminal. You intentionally forged documents, exploited an elderly person, and violated property rights." It landed like a second hammer blow. Brianna broke into sobs, crumpling into her chair, hands over her face. Daniel, sitting behind, stood. He walked forward slowly, voice unsteady but clear. "Your Honor, may I speak?" I'm Mrs. Marjorie Hale's son. I stayed silent too long. I knew my wife was wrong, and I didn't stop her. I accept responsibility for my cowardice, and I apologize to my mother. He bowed deeply, voice tight. I looked at my son, and my heart twisted. The hurt, the betrayal, the anger in me seemed to melt for a moment, leaving only fatigue and a gentle sadness, like a damp cloth laid over my heart. The judge nodded, voice softer but still firm. An apology is a good beginning, but justice must still be served. She lifted the gavel and struck it 3 clean times. The court orders, all of Mrs. Marjorie Hale's assets and accounts are to be restored. All related transactions are frozen and under investigation. The defendant, Brianna Hale, is charged with forgery and financial abuse of an elder. Court is adjourned. The sound echoed through the room. I closed my eyes for a moment. Not from joy relief. Something heavy in me, after months of strain, was finally set down. As people rose, I stood and walked slowly into the hallway. My heels tapped evenly on the stone floor. Cold air swept in from the big door, carrying the smell of rain, the scent of freedom. Daniel caught up and walked beside me. He didn't speak, just walked, his hands clenching and unclenching. At last he said, low and hoarse, "Mom, I'll take care of Nora, and I'll fix what I broke." I stopped and looked at him. "You don't need to fix the past, Daniel. Live so Nora doesn't have to repeat it." He nodded, eyes wet. Brianna was led out of the courtroom, hands shaking, face drained. She glanced back, lost. I didn't look at her. I turned away and stepped out the big door. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds were thinning, and late sunlight angled through the wet leaves. I drew a deep breath, my chest lighter than it had been in months. Pauline came out and gently took my hand. Justice was late, but it came. I smiled, eyes on the end of the rain-wet street. Yes, some wounds don't need revenge, only proof that we were right. I walked down the courthouse steps, the wind tossing my silver hair. Traffic hummed in the distance, life falling back into its ordinary rhythm. And in the middle of it, I no longer felt like a victim. I was a survivor, standing steady in the wreckage, carrying the calm of someone who had won herself back. That day, for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid. I felt only freedom, the kind no one can ever sign away again. 2 weeks after the trial, on a late afternoon with sunlight spilling gold across the lawn, I heard a gentle knock. When I opened the door, Daniel stood there thinner, eyes hollow, his shirt wrinkled like he'd walked out of a storm that wouldn't end. He was quiet for a few seconds, then spoke softly. "Mom, can I come in?" I nodded and stepped aside, letting him into the small lakeside house I'd just moved into. It was peaceful here, only a 10-minute drive from town, but just far enough to breathe without the past chasing you. Daniel sat down, hands locked together, unsure where to begin. After a while he said, "Mom, I know it's over, but I can't live with myself if I don't say this." I sat across from him, waiting. He took a breath, voice shaking but honest. "I was manipulated, Mom. Brianna knew how to make me feel guilty, to make me believe that if I didn't take her side, I was a bad husband, a bad father. I didn't see that I was losing you piece by piece." I looked at my son, and I wasn't angry anymore. Just a soft sadness, like wind across the water. I spoke quietly, slow as breathing. "No one controls a person with a conscience, Daniel. They only use your silence. And you let silence speak for you for too long." He bowed his head, his knuckles whitening. "I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it right. I just hope you'll let me be your son again." I stood, walked to him, and laid a hand on his shoulder. "You've always been my son. Sometimes we have to walk through loss to see who's truly still there." His eyes filled. When he left, I watched until his car disappeared behind the trees along the shore. Relief spread through me not because I'd forgiven, but because I no longer carried resentment. I started over at 70. This little house by the lake used to be the getaway Robert and I bought back in the 80s. Now it's truly home. Every morning I wake before the sun has time to slip through the curtains. I roll out my yoga mat in the living room, breathe deep, and feel the cool air on my skin. Some mornings, the lake lies under a light veil of fog. I sit by the window with a cup of peppermint tea and turn the pages of a book. The only sounds are sparrows calling on the porch and the whisper of wind through the curtains. That feeling quiet, whole, completely free was something I never truly had in all those years of being a wife, a mother, a woman who endured. I planted a small garden by the porch, yellow daisies, lavender, and a few white roses Robert always loved. I tend them daily and talk to them like old friends. Sometimes I think, if flowers had souls, they'd understand me better than the people I once lived with. In the afternoon, I walk the lakeshore with a small notebook to capture stray thoughts, quotes, old memories, things I want to leave for Sophie, the one grandchild I fully trust. Sophie visits every weekend. She's 12, hair the color of honey, eyes as clear as the lake out front. Every time Daniel's car stops, she jumps out and shouts, "Grandma, my hero." I laugh and open my arms. She hugs me tight, the scent of apple shampoo in her hair making my throat catch. In her eyes there's no pity, only pride, as if I'd stepped out of a fairy tale where the hero is an old woman. That afternoon we sat on the porch. Sophie bit into a slice of my fresh apple pie and asked, "Grandma, why aren't you mad at Dad anymore? He looks so sad." I smoothed her hair and smiled. "Anger only wears you out, sweetheart. Some people aren't bad, they're weak, and sometimes the best thing we can do is refuse to be weak with them." Sophie thought for a moment, then looked up. "Grandma, I'm scared that when I grow up, people won't believe me like they didn't believe you." I looked into her eyes and saw myself years ago naive, wanting to be understood, wanting to be trusted. I squeezed her hand, my voice slow but certain. "You don't need everyone to believe you. You need to believe yourself, and never let anyone speak for you, Sophie. Once you let them decide who you are, you lose your own voice." She nodded, eyes bright with understanding. She rested her head on my shoulder and whispered, "I want to be strong like you." I smiled, gentle and deep. "No, sweetheart, I'm not stronger than anyone else. I just learned that silence can be a way to fight when it walks with the truth." A soft breeze stirred, carrying a hint of lavender. I looked out at the lake, where the sunset lay like a thin sheet of silk. Peace settled in my chest. Sometimes I think of Brianna not to resent her, but to remind myself that greed and deceit always carry a price. As for me, I finally paid off the debt of blind trust. At night, I sit at my desk and write, "Happiness isn't being loved forever. It's knowing when to leave so you can keep yourself." Then I set down the pen and listen to the crickets and the faint slap of water on the shore. I smile, close my eyes, and feel the night breeze in my silver hair. My life, which once felt withered, is blooming again quietly, steadily, and brightly in its own way. And I know that when the sun rises, I'll start another day no longer afraid of losing anyone and never letting anyone speak for me again. A year after the trial, I stood on a small stage in Belmont's downtown hall beneath a new plaque gleaming with the words, "Hail Foundation for Elder Justice." It's the nonprofit I founded with the assets I reclaimed, with one purpose: to support older women who've suffered financial abuse or been stripped of control by their own families. When I lifted the microphone, faces in the audience, mostly silver-haired women like me, looked up, eyes full of understanding. Some nodded, some quietly wiped tears. I knew many of them had been called useless, too old to be heard. I wanted them to know none of us are truly weak. I spoke low and steady, each word etched into the air. People think age is a sign of weakness. In truth, we're just watching in silence. When you've lived long enough, you learn when to keep quiet and when to speak. Applause rolled through the hall like a warm wave. I smiled and turned to my side where Sophie stood. She wore a simple white dress, her eyes bright, her small hand gripping mine. I felt the warmth in that palm, the passing of the torch to a new generation, clearer and stronger. Sophie looked up and whispered, "Grandma, you're my hero." I squeezed her hand and answered softly but sure, "No, sweetheart, real heroes don't let others define them. And you'll be one of them." Late light poured through the tall windows, reflecting off the bronze plaque. For a moment, I could almost see Robert smiling somewhere, proud that I hadn't let fear decide the rest of my life. After the ceremony, I sat as the hall emptied. Outside, the sun was slipping behind the river, a pale band of orange across the horizon. I sipped tea, listened to the wind, and felt my heart light as paper. I had walked through betrayal, loss, and justice, and now there was only peace. I watched Sophie helping staff clean up and realized something simple. I hadn't just reclaimed assets. I'd reclaimed a voice my own, and for women like me. If you're still listening, thank you for walking with me to the end. I believe that wherever you are, big city or small town, you understand that justice and dignity don't have an expiration date. Tell me where you're watching from, so I'll know how far this story has traveled. And if, like me, you believe that women who stand up at any age deserve to be heard, please leave a comment, or subscribe so we can keep telling stories of courage, freedom, and stubborn love. I'm Marjorie Hale, and here's the last lesson I want to leave. Don't let anyone speak for you because your voice is the greatest power no one can take away.